I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co-host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future.
I think what's so challenging is that there are these people talking about AI as if it will replace people, humans, creativity, etc. And I think that's really ham-fisted and not true. So there's just so much emotion around the issue and fear that I think people are picking sides and not thinking about how there is ultimately, in my opinion, there's going to be this middle way rather than we're going to be sitting at two extremes of entirely replacing humans or can't possibly do it better than a human.
HumanIntelligence.news is excited to welcome Jane Friedman to the show. She's spent a long and storied career in the book publishing industry with a focus on author education and trend reporting. She is the editor of The Bottom Line, the essential publishing industry newsletter for authors. And she's also been named Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World. Her latest book is The Business of Being a Writer, which is the second edition, and that received a starred review from Library Journal. So welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you so much, Ned.
It's such a pleasure to chat with you because I've been reading your writing for a number of years as an author myself. And so very briefly, how did you get into telling authors how to do it better?
Well, I started working in the publishing industry right out of college, and it was at a mid-sized house that did lots of nonfiction for various communities, enthusiast communities. And I was there for about 3 years when I moved into the Writer's Digest division, which is a brand that serves the writing community. And so I was with Writer's Digest for about a decade, and that's where my first experience came in helping writers with all aspects of writing and publishing. I did some other things for about 5 years after that, but then when I went full-time freelance, I eventually circled back to what I knew best, which is the publishing industry.
Yeah. Well, what's fascinating about your career too is that you've built a career, as far as I can tell, largely online. You do appear at conferences, you do a lot of work individually with people, but a lot of your presence is online. So, back in the 80s or 90s, this kind of career couldn't have really happened. So, could you briefly describe how your career has morphed into this kind of newsletter and world of advising people online?
I started blogging for my employer, Writer's Digest, in 2008. And when I left, I continued doing that, but at my own website, which I had already established years prior.
Very
Um,
smart of you.
it was, I have to say, I bought my domain name, janefriedman.com, in 2005,
Mhm.
although I didn't actually put a site up until about 5 years later. So I sat on it for a bit, but I knew that at some point I wasn't going to work for that company forever. And I knew it would be important to just start to build a reputation for myself and my name outside of any employer that I might be associated with.
Right, because you never know, things change.
Correct. Uh, so that, and then towards the end of my tenure at Writer's Digest, social media started to emerge, Facebook, Twitter, and I was just naturally interested in those tools. And I created accounts. I created accounts for my employer as well at the time. And so, again, when I left my employer, I was just really well situated with an online presence, even though I didn't need to use it necessarily to make money because I still had traditional employment for some time. But the
Right.
time, I would say, what year was this? 2014, I realized I either had to find another job because I was going to get fired or I was going to have to freelance for a while until I found another job. Well,
Right, and that part of your career success has also mirrored the necessity of authors building an online platform for themselves. So
yeah,
your ability to do that has been a good way of demonstrating to authors what's possible. Is that fair?
you nailed it. I mean, this is one of the reasons I always advocate authors not depend on an agent or depend on a publisher. You partner with them, but you do not depend.
Right.
Uh, and so, yeah, when I started freelancing, it went so well because I'd already established this foundation and it was just a matter of deciding, okay, what do I want to offer that people will pay for? And I went through a lot of different iterations of my business model before I landed on what is essentially a newsletter model today mixed with online education.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for those listeners who don't know, authors are often asked by agents and by publishers, what does your platform look like? So that means your online following, your social presence, both online and off. What conferences do you speak at? How many people actually know your name? And
Right.
so you've been a great example of someone showing how people can get to know your name. Even if you are not Stephen King, you can still have a platform, right?
Yes, yes. In fact, it's easier to build a platform if you're fairly narrow or focused in who you're trying to serve. So I try to encourage authors to think small in order to grow big.
Oh, fantastic advice. So, the reason that we're talking is not just because I admire your work and your writing, but also because we've now gone through another sea change. First, there was the big internet push, and then the whole change in how bookstores happened and how books were sold. I won't even touch on Amazon and the ebook revolution. But right now, we're in kind of another wave of change with AI. And so, you and I met at the Red Pencil Conference up in Washington State. And there are various approaches to AI. Could you outline the two camps and kind of where you fall, if you don't mind?
There's probably more than two.
Yeah, but there are two kind of very divisive camps, and then
Yeah.
there's a spectrum of approaches in between. I think you and I are somewhat in between, but I'd love to hear your characterization of what the two ends of the spectrum are, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I'll say these to some extent, these are caricatures, but I see these
Yeah,
caricatures out in public all the
in
time.
the wild.
Yeah. One is stridently anti-AI. It's going to result in the doom of civilization. It's going to decrease human creativity and cognitive thinking. No one will know how to write anymore. Whatever your worst fear is, AI is going to bring it about. In other words, maybe it's related to the environment or the economy or whether the tech lords will put us in chains. Like it doesn't matter. Your worst fear will be realized by AI.
Uh-huh.
And then on the other side are the boosters, the people who are probably making a lot of money or have investments in AI, or they have a lot of skin in the game, and it's to their benefit to say, this is the next thing, and everyone needs to get on board. And there's certainly a lot of pressure and conversation around that. I would say more in like corporate business circles where whether it's board members or shareholders or investors, they're like, what's your AI strategy? What are you doing with AI? We
Yeah,
need to paint some AI all over this in order to make you look current. So there's
right.
there's also a lot of crazy
Boosterism, let's say.
boosterism. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So part of the reason this is relevant to this conversation is that we are not radiologists who are using AI to analyze large data pools of medical scans. We are not using AI to determine ocean acidity. The particular use of generative AI, kind of to double click or to go a level deeper, has an effect on the writing world. Could you describe that effect, negative and positive? I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I figure you spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Well, you know, this change is so fast. So I
Uh-huh.
want to put that out there. And also, I don't think everyone's being transparent about what they're actually doing with the technology, which
Mm.
sometimes makes it hard to comment. But I will say that if you're a publisher of any size right now, you are probably looking at already using AI or looking at AI for its benefits in automating some of the back office stuff that really no one wants to do, like inventory management, metadata. There was just a CEO of a major publisher saying, I've got a marketing manager who saves 30 minutes a day creating buttons on our retail site. She's like, I don't want her using her brain cells to create buttons on a website. If AI can do it, let AI do it. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of that's happening that I think it's hard to make an argument for why that's harming anyone, especially if it frees up these people's time to do more creative work and do work that, is collaborative and brings value and the human element into the equation. I
Mhm.
think the fear is that there are publishers that are using AI possibly to replace designers, editors, and so on. And I think that's happening in pockets, but it's often the under-resourced people or publishers that are doing that because as of today, this is my argument.
Yeah.
As of today, I think it's AI, what AI produces is pretty weak. It's a commodity. Often you can tell that it's AI. And so it brings the value of whatever you're doing down. oh, you had to use AI. It's kind of like wah wah. You couldn't
Yeah.
afford a real human designer or a real human editor. You had to resort to AI. That's what
Yeah.
it feels like currently.
Mm.
Now, the technology may progress, we may feel differently, but I do feel like it's right now the option for people who don't have anywhere else to turn. I'm sure there are unethical people out there trying to replace workers, but I don't people in publishing, they're not money-driven people generally. Even if they're owned by mega corporations, people are in publishing for the human aspect of it, not because they're trying to make a fortune.
Right. Right. That's really fascinating that the actual feeling or the experience of the people within this industry are focused on the human. That's what
They
you're saying.
are.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've heard from a number of copywriters and people who create content, and I'm saying content in quotes
Yeah.
because what we're talking about is like a technical article that explains how to use a product, or an article that says, 10 ways that washing your laundry is better than not washing it. Like the type of stuff that people produce online to promote a company rather than something that is created entirely from the heart. I'm saying entirely because there is heart in content. People put a lot of work into that. And I've noticed a lot of those people are feeling their incomes being heavily affected because that type of content can be relatively easily generated by ChatGPT or other large language models. Now, whether that content has as much heart in it and whether it's as good, that seems kind of immaterial to people who are making business decisions. And so it's unfortunate that that type of writing is being affected. The other thing that I've heard is that when you're so back in the day in the 90s, I was a cub reporter at a newspaper, right? And so the sports scores and the basic obits that I wrote and the basic writing can mostly be done now by a large language model. And so I wonder if the on ramp for people learning the basic skills of writing on deadline and writing short pieces and summarizing large pieces of information into, like, we only have 250 words for this column. Get that, whole bunch of research you did into 250 words and do it in an hour. If that type of skill set and training for early writers, if that's subsumed by large language models, where does the on ramp go? That's one of my questions.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I guess none of us do, right?
I think, but I am optimistic. Like I have
Mm.
faith that paths will emerge. I don't think that suddenly there's just no longer we won't have entry level jobs or there won't be a way to learn what you need to learn. It will happen. I trust that we've figured out technological shifts before and we still have entry level jobs today. So I think that part of it I think is going to work out. I think the scarier part is the first issue you mentioned, the content pieces or like the things that you can actually feasibly produce something passable with AI and maybe it does the job. So again, I would call it like commodity writing. That's not to insult it, but
Yeah,
it's the sort of stuff that up until now you would need a human to put some amount of effort into it. And
right,
maybe you don't going forward, or maybe it's a much quicker human review. Um,
right,
and certainly when I think about book publishing, I think there are large categories of nonfiction that stand to be decimated because people quite naturally will prefer to use a chatbot to get the information they need. Like they're not interested in the act of reading, they're not interested in the act of what does this human have to say? They're just looking to solve a specific problem. Like, where do I take my 91-year-old grandmother when we go to Paris so she doesn't have to climb a lot of stairs or where, you know what I mean?
right, right. I understand what you mean. And I push back on that gently by saying that if I'm going to Italy or Paris, I really want to read something by a human being who's been to Paris rather than a chatbot that's amalgamating from a number of other sources that may be hallucinating that there are stairs in this place and there are no stairs, you know? So, yeah, it's a good point. I think the example has some issues, but your point is that there's commodity writing that is fine to be replaced by large language models. I get that. So, one of the concerns, of course, is that the on ramp might be replaced. And to your point, we've gone through technological shifts before. People back in the day said, oh, computers and Excel spreadsheets will get rid of the need for accountants. Well, accountants are busier than ever, right? I mean, they work much, much harder because they have many more tools. So maybe some of these tools become useful to people, especially for research purposes for writers. Amalgamating large amounts of data is easier when you have a system that can mine through and find things. One thing that I found interesting is that the general public is unaware of the distinction between generative AI and AI as like machine learning models that can go through data or can find patterns. And generative AI, for me, just for me, maybe not for you, is ethically problematic because of the way that it's trained, because it's taking copyrighted information from my books and from many, many other millions of books and using it without attribution and without payment to writers. So, any thoughts on that concern?
Well, I might respond with a question saying if remedies are put in place
Mhm.
and it becomes legal, like the training is done, we can't erase the
Ethically,
original sin, right? But
yeah.
let's say moving forward, remedies are put in place, it's perfectly legal. You can feel
Mhm.
comfortable about the models being trained in a way where creators are getting paid. What would you say then?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it would be up to each individual creator to make a decision about whether that feels ethical to them or that feels
Yeah.
right. But to your point, we're moving from well, ideally, we're moving
Mm,
from a Napster era into an era
mm,
where things are actually licensed. Now, whether
right.
writers will be fairly compensated is a whole other question. But the idea that there will be a legal framework for this is a good point. Yeah. Yeah, so I head up an organization called Human Intelligence, and we are foregrounding human creative acts and ensuring that the human voice matters because I think sometimes it's easy for people who are ignorant in the humanities, especially, to say, oh, all of this can be replaced. And I don't think it can be replaced so easily. And I don't think when you replace it, you're actually replacing it with something that's equivalent. Yeah. So you nodded. Do you want to speak more to that? Yeah.
Well, I think what's so challenging is that there are these people talking about AI as if it will replace
Hmm.
people, humans, creativity, etc. And I think that's really ham-fisted and not true.
Yeah.
Uh, I think, as I said at the Red Pencil keynote, which I know you were at, I think there's augmentation that's going to happen, but I don't see a lot of right out replacement that's going to happen.
Hmm.
So there may be some things, perhaps. Again, I find it really hard to predict the future. I have a lot of humility about what's going to happen or not
Really?
happen. So there's just so much emotion around the issue and fear that I think, as we opened this discussion, we talked about the two extremes.
Yeah.
And so I think people are picking sides and not thinking about how there is ultimately, in my opinion, there's going to be this middle way rather than we're going to be sitting at two extremes of
Mm.
entirely replacing humans or can't possibly do it better than a human.
Yeah. And the middle ground of finding a way to coexist with these technologies is a tricky one, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, meaning like not saying, oh, burn it all to the ground or embrace it 100% for every part of your life. Finding a way to coexist with AI and to acknowledge this is in the world and how do I establish a human voice and keep my human voice
Yeah.
somewhat sacrosanct in the face of this ongoing, what I'll call slop. And not all of it is slop, but a lot of it is. It's a tricky balance to strike. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And there's a lot of uncertainty
Yeah.
and discomfort. And people have, I think, and this includes myself, I think we don't like uncertainty. We want
Mhm.
answers. What
Yeah.
does it mean? What is going to happen? Where do I stand? And
Yeah.
I think we're going to be in this very confusing area for quite some time. I
Mhm.
mean, even the internet itself, I think we're still grappling with the questions of what it has wrought, like with the fact that kids on phones may not, you know, be living up to their full potential or, like
Yeah.
I don't have kids, but I see all of this angst in the culture because of mobile
Yeah.
devices and the internet. So, we're still grappling with that and we're going to be grappling with AI for maybe much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The route that we've taken at Human Intelligence is that we are allowing people to assert that they are a person. Surprisingly, we actually have to do this because in the era of bots and misinformation and fake accounts, actually demonstrating that someone is a person is a key grounding point. And then being able to analyze the provenance or how something was created and saying to a vast degree, this creation was actually done by a human being. That allows someone to hold on to both their identity and their work and proclaim that as like, hey, I did this thing. And surprisingly, without AI, we would not have to have that. So we're kind of part of the AI ecosystem in that we are giving people tools to demonstrate their own creativity and to demonstrate that their work is valuable in a world where content, as I said, can be created at the push of a button. So that's the route that we're taking.
There's a really great interview with the Grammys chief, the music Grammys
Yeah.
chief. It was in the Wall Street Journal over the summer. And it was an interview primarily about the effects of AI on the music industry. And I think they're further along the road in grappling with it. They don't have the answers, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I think they're maybe a little more commercially minded and looking at how are we going to get money out of this. Like they're not going to
Yeah.
make the Napster mistake, right? Although they did resolve the Napster mistake.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are some questions in there where, he's kind of pushed on, well, are you going to have awards for music that's AI generated? Or what are you going to do about that? And he makes this really, I think, philosophical point about how, well, when we don't have awards for synthesized music versus not synthesized music, and looking at the history of music, it gets made in all sorts of different ways. And he talks about how we're going to see a new generation of musicians who can't play an instrument.
Mhm.
They, maybe they can't even use the software, but they can use AI to make new creations. And, he sort of says, are we going to consider them musicians? He's like, I would. They're making music.
Mhm.
So I think I am keeping an open mind
Yeah.
about what might happen.
That's interesting. Yeah. I think we come down on different, just to be lay my cards on the table. I think we come
Yeah.
down differently on that question, but I appreciate that we can have a rational
Yes.
discussion about it because I come down firmly that that's not music, that's not creativity. But, I don't want to come across as some old guy in my yard yelling at
Right.
clouds, right? So I appreciate that we disagree on that, but we'll see what happens over the next 20 years or so. I did want to, before we bring this to an end though, I did want to get your thoughts on the Disney engagement with OpenAI. I don't know if you've seen the news in the last day or so.
I just saw the headline, but I haven't read into the details yet.
Yeah, so I won't push you on the details because I think the news is still emerging. But essentially, various large language models have ingested, again, without attribution or honoring copyright, IP that is owned by studios and owned by writers. I'll say that again. And so it's possible if you put the right prompt in to generate Mickey Mouse or generate, Belle or any of the Disney characters. And so Disney, I think, could have had a pretty profound copyright suit and could have
Oh,
taken
yeah.
OpenAI and other LLM businesses out of business entirely, much like companies took Napster down. But instead, from what I've read, and I haven't read all the articles, but what I read is that Disney actually invested $1 billion in OpenAI and licensed 200 characters for users who could actually create AI generated things with Disney IP.
Mhm.
And so with that, like there's a lot of devil in the details, right? But I mean, basically, Disney has opened the door for their IP to be used with AI. So it's a real sea change there.
I mean, it makes sense to me
Hmm.
that they would choose to let's use the technology to move forward rather than fighting tooth and nail
Yeah,
and getting embroiled in court battles. And there's some organizations that are like the New York Times that are going to fight tooth and nail, and maybe
yeah,
they should. I can't say.
yeah. Neither of us run the New York Times, to be clear. Yeah,
But when we talk about IP, because I studied the history of publishing,
yeah,
I take the really, really long view. It's probably too much of a long view, but still, I'll say it anyway. IP and copyright is fairly new in human history.
right.
And we tend, at least in my career, it's become such this precious thing. And I just feel much more loose about it. I think
Mhm.
we have changing attitudes and societal norms around
Yeah,
these. We used to not think about authors as owning what they wrote. They were inspired by God. And it would have made logical sense to them to say, I own this. Oh, it was inspired. It came through me out into the world.
right. Right. An
Um,
individual's personal rights
right.
is a fairly new innovation in human history.
Exactly. So, not saying I want to go back on the human rights front or I want to eliminate copyright law. I'm not saying that. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that I think there is going to be some evolution in how we look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Things are shifting. So we're in a time of change right now.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the conversation, Jane, and I've admired your work, and I will look forward to your writing on this topic. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ned.
You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news.